I've been using the French method to make macarons for years, and you can find my recipe and tutorials here on my page and on my website, sometimesimakecookies.com. I love to experiment and try new things, so it was only natural for me to branch out and try using the Swiss method for making my meringue. I'll make a separate video about the difference between the two techniques and the pros and cons of each, but for now, this is going to be a detailed tutorial about how to make macarons using the Swiss method. We're using a kitchen scale to measure our ingredients in grams. The best part about this recipe is we're using equal parts of all of the main ingredients. So choose the number of egg whites that you would like to use and crack them into your bowl. The egg whites don't need to come to room temperature because we're going to be heating them up on the stove. And you will need to make sure that the bowl you're using is heat proof. If you're just learning, I recommend using 2 egg whites so that you don't waste too many ingredients if things don't go well. I'm using 4 egg whites, which will give me about 30 sandwiched macarons. Make sure you don't get any egg yolks into your egg whites because even the smallest amount of fat from the egg yolks will make it impossible for you to whisk your meringue to stiff peaks. And of course, my 4th egg is the one that had the yolk break. So I'm just going to use a piece of the clean shell and I'm going to scoop that yolk out. The weight of your egg whites is the same as the weight of your granulated sugar. So if you had 100 grams of egg whites, you're going to add 100 grams of granulated sugar or caster sugar, which is a more fine version of granulated sugar, to that bowl. Egg white powder is an optional ingredient that can be added to help stabilize your meringue, and it's 4% of the egg white weight. So for 100 grams of egg whites, you would add 4 grams of the dried egg white powder. The almond flour will be the same weight as your egg whites, so for 100 grams of egg whites, it's 100 grams of almond flour. I recommend measuring the almond flour as you sift. There will always be some small pieces of almond flour that don't want to go through the sieve, so it's best to measure everything that goes through so you can be more accurate. And last, we have powdered sugar, which will be the same weight as the other ingredients, so 100 grams. Don't go out of your way to measure 100 grams of egg whites. Trying to get an exact amount of egg whites is a huge pain in the butt, which is why I love using this recipe. Just crack your egg whites and use that same weight for all of your other ingredients. After sifting the powdered sugar, whisk it together with the almond flour. Fill a small pot with 1 inch or 2 of water and bring it to a simmer on the stove. Then place your heat-proof bowl with the egg whites and sugar on top and whisk it continuously until the sugar dissolves and the mixture becomes frothy. Make sure that your bowl is not touching the surface of the water. If you're using a thermometer, you want to bring this mixture to a temperature of 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. If you aren't using a thermometer, you just need to make sure that the sugar is fully dissolved when you rub the mixture between your fingers. If you're using a hand mixer, you can whisk your meringue in the same bowl that you had on the stove. I'm using a stand mixer, so I'm going to transfer my mixture to that bowl. I can't use my stand mixer bowl on the stove because it's too narrow and too deep, and it will end up touching the surface of the water. I'm going to start mixing it on a medium-low speed or a speed 4 on a KitchenAid. If you're using a powder color, now is the time to add that in. Continue to let it mix on this speed for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, this is what my meringue looks like. If you're going to use a gel color, now is the time to add that in. Now turn the speed up to medium-high or a number 6 on the KitchenAid and leave it here for about 3 minutes. Make sure you're not using an oil-based color. And if this is your first time making macarons, I recommend skipping the color altogether because adding an extra variable can make it really difficult to troubleshoot if something goes wrong. And if you're wondering when we're going to be adding the flavor to these shells, the answer is never. All of the flavor comes from the filling. The only exceptions to that rule is if I'm adding a dry ingredient with a flavor like cocoa powder or matcha powder, but even then, adding small amounts of those ingredients can really mess up your shells. So I recommend learning how to make macarons without adding any extra ingredients. And then if you want to experiment and try to add flavors, you can do that later. After 3 minutes, it's time to check our meringue. As you swirl the whisk around in the bowl, you want to feel some resistance. You don't need this meringue to be quite as stiff as you do with the French method because it's more stable. You can add your dry ingredients to your mixer bowl, but I like to transfer my meringue into a larger bowl because I just find it easier to work with. Add in half of the almond flour and powdered sugar mixture and gently fold to incorporate those dry ingredients. Once those are mixed in, add in the other half of your dry ingredients and repeat the same process. Once your dry ingredients are fully incorporated, you can start deflating the batter. Press the batter against the sides of the bowl and then fold it over to make sure that you're deflating it evenly. You can find a real-time video of me doing this macaronage process on my page if you feel like you need a little bit more guidance. The goal is to deflate this batter until the consistency is just right, and this sometimes takes a bit of practice. What you're looking for is batter that flows off your spatula in ribbons and sinks back down into itself after about 10 to 15 seconds. Pour your batter into a piping bag fitted with a number 12 piping tip. You can also use a 2A piping tip, which is slightly larger, but I prefer using the number 12. Most of the equipment that I'm using can be found in my Amazon storefront. Pipe your macarons on a silicone baking mat or a piece of parchment paper. Because my baking tray has sides, I flip it upside down to get better airflow. Hold the piping tip vertically over the center of the circle and squeeze the piping bag until the batter comes out and reaches the edges of the circle. Then gently release the pressure on the bag and move the tip in a swirl pattern before lifting it up. Lift up your tray and pat the bottom of it to break up air bubbles. You can also just bang the tray on your countertop, but I like to do it this way. Use a toothpick to get rid of any of the craters that have shown up after popping the bubbles. Let the macarons rest on your counter until they form a skin that is dry to the touch. For me, this takes 15 to 20 minutes, but in a more humid climate, this can take 45 minutes to an hour. Start preheating your oven early on in this process. You want to make sure the oven has reached a stable temperature before you put your macarons inside. Bake them at 300 degrees Fahrenheit on the center rack of your oven, one tray at a time, for a range of 18 to 22 minutes. The bake time and temperature is highly dependent on your specific oven. You'll know that your macarons are done when you can gently wiggle the top and it doesn't move side to side. Let them cool completely before trying to remove them from the tray. If the bottoms of your macarons are sticking, it means you might have underbaked them. One thing you can do is pop that tray or that baking mat in the freezer for 5 minutes, and then when you pull it out, it's a little easier to get those sticky macarons off. Just try to bake them a few minutes longer next time. Here's a cross section. There's a very small gap at the top, but once I add the filling and let them mature in the fridge for 1 or 2 days, that will disappear. I use a 1A tip to pipe my filling. I'm using a vanilla bean American buttercream. You can find my American buttercream tutorial here on my page, and it is also on my website. If you aren't a fan of buttercream, you can use chocolate ganache, curd, or jams to fill your macarons as well. After sandwiching your macarons together, keep them stored in an airtight container in the fridge for 24 to 48 hours, and always enjoy them at room temperature so that they have the best possible texture. You can also store them in the freezer for a couple of months. I know this video was long, so if you're still here, thank you for watching, and I hope you found this helpful.